Hello everyone. As a part of the initiative taken by Zoological Society of Assam online educational resource program, let us discuss today two very important topics. The first one, Shelford's law of tolerance, and the second one, Blackman's law of limiting factors. Both of these two laws are part of laws of limiting factors. Learning outcome. The presentation mainly includes the following aspects like Shelford's law of tolerance and its characteristics, central concept and its explanation, modern review of Shelford's law of tolerance, subsidiary principles associated with this law, relative limits of tolerance of stenothermal and eurythermal organisms, zone of tolerance, impact of environmental factors on living organisms, and lastly, the most important one, Blackman's law of limiting factor. Here, I have cited different examples by taking carbon dioxide and light as a limiting factor. In my previous presentation, I have concentrated on the minimal factors affecting the growth rate of any biological process. But it was American ecologist Shelford in 1913 proposed a modification on the law of minimum. According to Shelford's law of tolerance, organisms have an ecological maximum and minimum with a range in between, which represent the limits of tolerance, too much or too little. So, it is not only the factors present in limits or scarcity, but also the excess or abundance of that same factor can affect the growth or development of organism or rate of any biological process. That is, too much or too little of any abiotic factor can limit or prevent growth of a population in an ecosystem, even if all other factors are at or near the optimum level. Every population thrives in an optimal range of abiotic factors. Certain organisms' survival and existence depend upon the multiple set of conditions where each individual has different minimum, maximum and optimum ecological factor to establish success. The most favorable zone is called the optimum zone. So, optimum range is that range which is the best condition within tolerant range for an organism, that is, it is the healthiest zone. Beyond this range, one finds less and less number of these organisms. So, by crossing the optimal range or healthiest zone, one can find very few number of species. It is only within this interval that life is possible for any particular plant or animal species. There is an optimum concentration in the interval called preferendum. So, preferendum is the preference of a species for a particular environmental variable like temperature, salinity, etc., for which metabolic processes occur at maximum speed. So, in preferendum or in preference zone, metabolic processes always occurs in highest speed. Central concept of Shelford's law of tolerance. The presence and success of an organism depends upon the completeness of a complex of conditions or characters. Various environmental factors do not influence the organism independently. The effect of one factor is modified by the other, and hence the organism responds to the totality of the environment. Complex of character or conditions include temperature, light, humidity, absence and presence of other species. All this forms as a whole complex of conditions or complex of characters. Absence and failure of an organism can be controlled by the qualitative or quantitative deficiency or excess with respect to any one of several factors, which may approach the limits of tolerance for that organism. A particular organism may have narrow range of tolerance for some factor, medium for other, and wide for another. Thus, ranges or limits vary seasonally, geographically, or with stages of their life cycle. As for example, take humidity. Aquatic species require this in quantitative abundance. It also needs some qualitative properties apart from these quantitative factors like dissolved oxygen, minerals, etc. Some require specific type of shelter and other resources. Some species even require certain seasonal variations in their environment to successfully complete their life cycle. The concept of limiting effect of maximum as well as minimum constituents was incorporated to the law of tolerance by Shelford. The abundance or distribution of an organism can be controlled by certain factors like climatic, topographic, and biological requirements of plants and animals. Where levels of this exceeds the maximum or minimum limits of tolerance of that organism. All nutrients required for the growth and development of organism or plant are equally important, but any nutrient in abundance may limit other nutrients absorption, thus indirectly restricting or limiting the growth of organism or plant. Thus, Shelford's law of tolerance is possibly the more precise indication of natural complexity. Each individual or a population is subjected to an ecological change that associated with the minimum and maximum capacity to any complex environmental factors. The range wherein it carried out from minimum to maximum signifies the limits of tolerance of organism. For proper understanding of the Shelford's law of tolerance, we can take the example of detrimental effects of too much nitrogen. Fertilizer production and land use, legume crops and fossil fuel burning deposits approximately 140 teragram per year of new nitrogen into soil, water and air. So very few are recycled. Enrichment of nitrogen and other nutrients welcome some other species like wheat. When nitrogen level increases in water, food, then it brings threat to the human life. Again, exotic legume can increase the amount of nitrate in drinking water. So nitrogen enrichment is reducing biodiversity and increasing the number of pests, and thus it is affecting the human life severely. Modern review of Shelford's law of tolerance. From the time of Shelford, much work has been done in stress ecology so that the limits within which various plants and animals can exist are known properly. In this aspect, stress test is a very important one. Stress ecology mainly gives its importance on the response of ecosystem to any change which occur within it. Environmental stress refers to physical, chemical and biological constraints on the productivity of the species and on the development of ecotype. Stress in aquatic animals occur due to various disturbances in their environment. This physiological approach has helped ecologists to understand the distribution of organisms in nature. The area of stress ecology provides ecologists with a focal point to measure, evaluate, integrate and predict the effects of changes in the structure and function of natural ecosystem. Stress ecology study will help the ecologist to evaluate not only the potential harmful stressors. Example of stressors are pesticides, but will also increase the understanding of ecosystem response to such agent. Despite of all physical requirements within the limit of tolerance, organisms may still fail because of biological interactions like competition or predation, etc. So for competition, predation and other biological interaction or interrelations, there come some issues where organisms still fail to exist even all requirement present within their tolerance range. Studies in natural ecosystem must accompany experimental laboratory studies which of necessity isolate individuals from their populations and communities. So studies should be carried out by combining both natural ecosystem and laboratory conditions. Subsidiary principles of Shelford's law of tolerance. Organisms may have a wide range of tolerance for one factor and narrow range of tolerance for another. Organisms with wide ranges of tolerance for limiting factors are likely to be most widely distributed. An organism with narrow tolerance range is said to be steno for that factor and wide tolerance range is said to be eury. Organisms can be steno with respect to one factor and eury with respect to different one. For example, introduced species that outcompete native species might possess the advantage of a wider range of tolerance than the native one. When human activities like habitat destruction, burning of fossil fuels, and pollution alter environment, it may test some species tolerance limit beyond their ability to survive. Death or even extinction of species may result. You can take the example of sunfishes. They are eurythermal but stenohaline. The tolerance ranges for environmental factors partly define the niche of an organism. When conditions are not optimum for a species with respect to one ecological factor, the limits of tolerance may be reduced for other ecological factors. Here we can take the example of nitrogen. Pullman reports that when soil nitrogen is limiting, the resistance for the grass to drought is reduced. In other words, he found that more water was required to prevent wilting at low nitrogen level than the high level. Very frequently, it is discovered that organisms in nature are not actually living at the optimum range with regard to a particular physical factor. In such cases, some other factors are found to have greater importance. Here, certain tropical orchids, for example, grow better in full sunlight than in shade, provided they are kept cool. In nature, they grow only in shade because they cannot tolerate the heating effect of direct sunlight. The period of reproduction is usually a critical period when environmental factors are most likely to be limiting. The limit of tolerance for reproductive individuals are usually narrower than for non-reproducing adult plants or animals. Reproductive individuals have different phases in their life cycle like seeds, eggs, embryos, seedlings, larvae, etc. Adult blue crab and many marine animals can tolerate water which has high chloride content. So, they are found in some distance up the rivers. The larvae cannot live in such water, so the species cannot reproduce in the river environment, so never establish permanently there. Again, Flowering of plants is affected by temperature through thermoperiodism, that is the response of plant to rhythmic diurnal fluctuations in temperature. It also displays in phenology of the plant. For the relative degree of tolerance, in ecology, a series of terms can be used. For steno, we can use narrow, and for uri, we can use wide. For temperature fluctuation, one can use stenothermal and eurythermal, which refers to narrow and wide tolerance range. Like for water, one can use stenohydric, euryhydric. For salinity, stenohaline, euryhaline. For food, stenophasic, euryphasic. And for habitat selection, stenoecious, eurycious. These terms apply not only to the organism level but equally to the community and ecosystem level. The best example can be given in case of coral reefs. Coral species form connected reefs that are greatly impacted by changes in oceanic temperature. Coral polyp receive nutrition from photosynthetic zooxanthella, that is an algae that lives within the polyp's endodermis. This is an endosymbiotic relationship. The zooxanthella cannot survive in lower oceanic temperature, that is below 18 degrees centigrade. Increase in oceanic temperature causes zooxanthella to leave the coral tissue, for which bleaching occurs, that is above 35 degrees centigrade. Rebuilding coral species have a typical optimal growth range, temperature water between 20 to 30 degrees centigrade. This slide clearly describes the relative limits of tolerance of stenothermal and eurythermal organisms. In case of stenothermal organisms, minimum, maximum and optimum, they lie closer to one another, so that a small shift in temperature which might have little effect on eurythermal species, but reverse occurs in eurythermal organisms where minimum, optimum and maximum they lie far away from one another. For proper understanding, we can take the example of brook trout eggs and leopard frog eggs. The limiting factor at the species level compared the condition under which brook trout eggs and eggs of the leopard frog develops and hatch. Trout eggs develop between 0 to 12 degrees centigrade with an optimum about 4 degrees centigrade. Frog eggs develops between 0 to 30 degrees centigrade with an optimum of about 22 degrees centigrade. Thus, trout eggs are stenothermal and low temperature tolerant, whereas frog eggs are eurythermal and high temperature tolerant. Trout, both eggs and adults, are in generally relatively stenothermal, but some species are more eurythermal than the brook trout. Zone of tolerance. Every factor has its own maximum and minimum limits in every organism, and thus zone of tolerance is ranged between two limits. From the above discussions, it is clear that there exists a zone of tolerance between two limits, that is maximum and minimum. Based on this, environmental factor has two zones. Number 1, zone of intolerance, and number 2, zone of tolerance. An organism grows best in the zone of tolerance which is favorable for its development. That is, zone of tolerance is also called one organism's healthiest zone or favorable zone. This zone is subdivided into three zones. First one is called optimum zone, supports maximum for the growth and development of organism. Here, maximum number of species can be found. Next one, critical minimum zone. This is the lowest limit of minimum below which organism growth is inhibited. Third one is critical maximum zone. It is the maximum limit of tolerance zone above which organism growth ceases. This slide clearly describes the impact of environmental factors on living organisms. From the image, it is quite clear that in the optimum zone, so here in this zone, maximum number of species are present. When we are crossing the optimum zone to gradually to zone of physiological stress, so here in this, species number become very less. Again, while entering the zone of intolerance, single species we cannot found. So, we can sum up by saying that each environmental factor like temperature, nutrient supply, etc. has both minimum and maximum level beyond which a species cannot survive or is unable to reproduce. Now comes another important law, that is Blackman's law of limiting factor. Blackman proposed this law in 1905, where he states that when a process depends on a number of factors, the rate is limited by the slowest factor. That is, here the slowest factor takes the main role. Blackman was a plant pathologist with his most study on limiting factor on plant photosynthetic system. This law was formulated in the context of photosynthesis. However, most of us have seen it in our day-to-day life. Suppose you are scheduled a trip with 4 of your friends. The time at which you had left would ultimately be determined by the friend who takes forever to get ready, irrespective of how early the others arrive. The best explanation can be given in case of photosynthesis, where carbon dioxide and light intensity takes a major role. So here in this diagram, this axis represents carbon dioxide concentration and this axis represents rate of photosynthesis. So let us see what had happened. Suppose a leaf is exposed to a certain light intensity which can utilize 5 mg of carbon dioxide per hour in photosynthesis. If only 1 mg of carbon dioxide enters the leaf in an hour, the rate of photosynthesis is limited due to carbon dioxide factor. But as the concentration of carbon dioxide gradually increases from 1 to 5 mg per hour, the rate of photosynthesis is also increased along the line AB. So when carbon dioxide concentration increases, the photosynthesis rate increases along the line AB. Any further increase in carbon dioxide concentration will have no effect on the rate of photosynthesis, which has become constant along the line B and C. So any further increase in concentration of carbon dioxide, there will be no increase in photosynthesis and it will be constant along the line B and C. It is because the low light intensity has become a limiting factor. Now, the rate of photosynthesis will increase further along the line B and D only if the intensity of light also increases from low to medium. At the point D, so here, the medium light intensity again becomes limiting factor and the rate of photosynthesis will again become constant along the line D and E. In the same way, at still higher light intensity, an increase in carbon dioxide will bring about an increase in photosynthesis rate along the line D and F. And after the point F, So here, when the higher light intensity also becomes a limiting factor, further increase in carbon dioxide concentration will have no favorable effect on the rate of photosynthesis, which become constant along the line F and G. So here, any further increase in carbon dioxide concentration will not bring any changes in the rate of photosynthesis, so the line become constant along the line F and G. Thus, it is quite evident from the above discussion that the rate of photosynthesis cannot be increased by increasing only one factor. The one factor should also be increased in proper proportion for favorable effect. Besides carbon dioxide and light, other factors which affect rate of photosynthesis are temperature, water, etc. Thus, they may also become limiting factor under certain conditions. This slide shows the relationship between light intensity and the rate of photosynthesis. At low level, there exists a linear relationship between light intensity and the rate of photosynthesis. But as the light intensity increases, the rate of photosynthesis also increases. After this, it will attain a maximum point. This point, the rate cannot increase beyond this maximum point. After maximum rate, it will become constant. After this, if one increases the light intensity, it will remain constant. But if the light intensity will become very high, the process will drop due to the breakdown of chlorophyll. The photosynthesis rate will be 0. So after maximum rate, there will be one saturation rate. The point saturation comes because though the light intensity is good, but other factors like carbon dioxide will act as limiting factor. These 3 books I have mainly used for the preparation of my presentation. So lastly, for any queries and feedback, please contact me in my email ID, that is deporable@gmail.com. Thank you very much.